everyone. Thanks for coming today, taking time out to spend with us to talk about making data work for you. So we're going to be discussing becoming a data-informed youth program and sort of seeing what that looks like and what is already happening with you guys about how you're using that information. So my name is Madeline Zielinski. I'm with Youth M.O.V.E. National. And our presenters today are Brianne Masselli and Kristin Thorp, who are also with Youth M.O.V.E. National. So Youth M.O.V.E. National is a partner with the National TA Network, and we cooperate with the University of Baltimore, Maryland. So thanks again for joining, everyone. We would actually like to hear from you guys about your experience with this webinar today. So we're going to put in the chat box here a link for a feedback form. So please feel free to go ahead and let us know what you think. You'll also have an opportunity to see that again at the end of the webinar. So before we get started, we'd love to hear from you guys and see who's in the audience today. So you're going to see a feedback tool come up where you'll be able to tell us who you are and get to know who's here. So we'll take just a minute or so to set that up and let you all respond. So we'll go ahead and just introduce yourself in the chat box here. Let us know who you are, where you're from, maybe what role you play. Excellent. So while everyone's taking the time to do that, I'll go ahead and let Brianne and Kristin talk about our learning goals for today.
Great. Thank you, Maddie. So
Yeah,
again,
thanks.
I just want to thank you all for joining us. And today what we're hoping to really do is to help bring kind of some foundational understanding about the building blocks of becoming a data-informed youth program, help you all gain an understanding of key evaluation terms and the value added of youth-driven program evaluation, and identify strategies for incorporating these evaluations into data-informed decision-making. Youth M.O.V.E. National is always hearing that youth programs are not sure what to collect or how to use the data that they do collect to promote program improvement and program sustainability. So we're really hoping that out of today's session you guys will be able to learn a bit, reflect, and kind of advance your programs through some data collection efforts. We also have a couple polling questions that we will bring up just to get to know a little bit more about your current efforts related to data collection. So as you can see, the first poll question popped up and says, do you collect data on youth engagement efforts now? And that would be youth engagement efforts within your system of care, the host agency that facilitates the youth programming or the youth M.O.V.E. chapter, or within your youth run program as it is. A little bit of time to think about your community work and if you collect data already. Okay, just a few seconds more for those of you that might not have selected your options. We have a small number of respondents, but it's looking like about 61% of you all are collecting some sort of data on youth engagement efforts currently. Now our next polling question is going to help us, if you could use the chat box to tell us what types of data you might be collecting. So if you're collecting survey data, attendance, those kind of pieces, just kind of share in on the chat box. Okay. Well, we'll let you guys continue to chat. I'm not seeing on my end any chat responses in just yet. So we'll kind of move on to understanding what is data. So what is data? Data is a lot of individual facts, it's statistics and items of information collected together for a reference or an analysis. So it really is information that can really help tell a story. That are assumed as facts, making the basis for reasoning or calculation. So once you have information, and then you're going to kind of make a decision around that and assume what you have kind of tells the truth of the story. The recorded factual material that is also kind of accepted within the scientific community. So within the research field, having recorded factual material helps build the validation of the work that you're doing and the findings around that work. So saying youth engagement is important. So there's also recorded factual material, which is often accepted material within the scientific community that really helps validate the work that's happening and can promote to the research field. Research data is data that's collected, observed, and or created for the purpose of analysis to produce original research results. So in the youth field and youth engagement in our work, there is some data out there around the value of the work that we do, and there is a space for a lot more of that to happen. And so we're really hoping to kind of broaden that field and have youth-run programs start collecting more data. We often hear in our work that folks should be kind of data-driven or data-informed. And there's a clear distinction that sometimes we confuse. And data-driven means that organizations rely on data mostly to make decisions. So when they look at their data, they use that to really make a strong, this program's ending or this program will continue, a really clean, black and white kind of decision-making process. Where data-informed is used to really improve, ask questions, and learn more about your programming, and then allow you to continue to improve and make decisions. And so what we're focusing on today is really focusing on the data and driven. And just to think about the distinction between the two, an analogy that we could consider is a pilot. When a pilot is getting ready to fly, data-driven would be that the pilot is on autopilot, that it is kind of, all the data is there, it allows the pilot to make all decisions, it is set to go, and therefore where informed is that the pilot needs to be aware of the data at different points and make very critical decisions throughout the course of the flight versus putting the plane on autopilot. So perhaps looking at data and making adjustments at takeoff or landing. So many of you already mentioned that you are collecting data of your youth programs already. And these are some types of data that we are curious to know what you are collecting. And if you select other or no, please feel free to put what your other types of data you're collecting in the chat box. And we'll just give you guys a little more time. Okay, so we're seeing here that a lot of you are collecting demographic information, so really knowing more about who the participants are in your program. Also collecting national evaluation data, which means that you are probably federally funded within your youth program and needing to report back. Those are all great reasons to be focused on data collection. And then number of participants that are involved in activities comes up as the third highest. All of these are great ways to consider engaging and tracking in your program. That one, building a data-informed youth program. So it's really important, and oftentimes youth programs, we're really excited about the doing of the work and the engagement and the aspects of social and connection, that we're not always thinking about all of the elements that help us become a more data-informed organization. So we're going to lay a foundation and some building blocks to help you guys think about where your organization is now. So the first two kind of building blocks is really understanding as a youth program, do you have a clear purpose, missions, vision, goals, activities that really help shape who you are, what you do, and how you plan on doing that. Without having a clear purpose for your youth-run program, you're often unsure of what data should be collected, when, and how. And so it's very important to really think about your program and think about your program as an independent entity at first, and your mission and vision might be very unique to your youth program, but then you might be nestled within a larger system of care structure. And it's okay for your youth program to have its own kind of mission and vision separate from that of your system of care, as well as having your own strategic plan with goals and activities that you might be doing independently that the system of care might be doing that's a little bit bigger. Leadership is also important, and we know that because many of us came to this work by having lived experience and very passionate, as well as stepping into leadership positions where we are really able to drive kind of what programming and activities look like. So having leadership at all levels, so if you're partnering with your system of care, if you are leading your youth program, your advisory boards, really being committed, inclusive, and participatory. So really set the expectations and the support for kind of moving the program forward and really kind of setting the tone. Oftentimes you see leaders that if leadership is unclear, then the youth program is unclear, and then they're sporadically kind of capturing information and not always capturing information. So it is really important to have that commitment. So if you currently don't have your mission, vision, goals, activities, really spending some time to sit there, because if you can't articulate what it is you do, then it will be hard to figure out how you're able to then evaluate and improve. Now the next three building blocks really look at professional development, resources, and analytic capacity. Tends to be a tough one because not all youth leaders who step into the work really like to do data analysis or collect data, or perhaps they haven't been in a position where they might need to start learning more about the benefit of collecting information, collecting data, and really needing support. And this is where we can see a lot of really great youth-adult partnership support. So not having a partnership with evaluators so the evaluators drive the process, but really a coaching and a mentoring partnership where evaluation is supporting both the professional development of the youth leadership staff as well as allowing the youth leaders to kind of help understand the process, see the value in the process, and learn the skills to drive the process in the future themselves. And again, it's really hard to do these three steps if you don't have that clear vision in the beginning, because it's really hard when you don't know what you don't know to then go and ask for professional development or resources to kind of build your capacity. And here are the last two. So one is focusing on a culture of learning. And we touched upon that in the previous set of building blocks. And that really is that young adults are not researchers. They're stepping into this work they're doing the work for the passion and the drive and for the meaningfulness of it, and that they really need support to understand that within the youth movement, we are growing the knowledge base of youth engagement. We're learning and establishing best practices, and along the way, there have to be continued cycles of learning within. And then also, there has to be continued improvement cycles. We are really, really just coming to the movement where if we haven't been collecting information in the past, we're starting now, and that takes time. That is kind of trial and error in the beginning. So when you start collecting things and then you realize, oh, we need to do this, you really need to be willing and open to learn together and then continuously improve. So creating that space to learn and interpret the data, including all of the key stakeholders that are involved. So youth and young adults themselves, with those adult supporters and partners that might be providing the coaching and the professional development, and continuously setting goals and collecting the information around how are you doing as it pertains to those goals, reviewing that data, and then utilizing that data for action. And action might mean continuation of the program, advancing the program, or action might mean that maybe this isn't working out for us and we have to go back and improve on it. So it's just the last kind of cycle of building blocks. So the first two, as you can see, really help provide your youth-run organization clarity. There's strong leadership, there's clear purpose, and clear understanding of who you are and how you'll do the work. The second three in the red really focus on your capacity as a youth-run organization. Do you have the capacity to really start supporting evaluation efforts within your program? And then the last is creating a strong culture of learning together and consistently improving your efforts related to your youth-run engagement activities. And so this is just a nice framework to really think about where are you as if you had to reflect. Maybe you have very, very strong leadership and a clear purpose, and you have a really strong culture of improving together and learning together, but perhaps the capacity to actually track the data is missing. And perhaps maybe that's where you want to spend some time thinking about how do we get from clear purpose to sustainability of our program when we might not have the resources, the data analytics capacity, or the know-how of what to do with that data and how to collect it. So it's just a nice kind of reference point, and there's that you can use within your work. So there's types and sources of data. So primary, which is collecting new data. So this could be interviews, focus groups, on environmental scans, surveys, questionnaires, and observations. So this is what some of you guys checked off that you guys are asking within your youth engagement activities. So you're asking demographic information that might be on the survey or a questionnaire form. Some of you guys checked off the focus group kind of box. And then there's secondary, so which is accessing existing data from another source. So this would be if your system of care is collecting national evaluation data, and as a youth program, for whatever reason, you want to go back in, you're not collecting the data, but you want to go back in and perhaps gather that information. That would kind of be accessing data that was already in place that someone else has collected. And so those are kind of two approaches. All right, and now we're setting the stage for evaluation. And I'm going to Kristin.
Great, thanks so much, Bree. So before you can actually get into evaluation, I think it's really helpful to understand why it is important for youth programs and local Youth M.O.V.E. chapters to do evaluation. So understanding how data can be used and what it can do for you will really help you to see the value of the evaluation process. Data can be used for many reasons, including the critical effort to ensure that you are meeting your program's goals and objectives. So going back to what Bree just mentioned about your clarity, about being really clear about what it is that you do as a program or as an organization, data can really help you to understand that. So evaluation is the process of collecting information or data that helps you to assess whether you are accomplishing what you set out to do in a really fair and objective way. As I just mentioned, one of the key ways to use your evaluation results is to capture your program's achievements and successes. So identifying successes through evaluation can be a great way to develop the perfect elevator speech and can support you in justifying why your program needs to be sustained later on. By evaluating your program activities, you may be able to leverage the information you collect to make the case to your host agency, for example, your current or your future funders, that what you are doing is having an impact on young people and the community, and that they should set aside funds to sustain your program. You can also use your evaluation results to support advocacy efforts. If you can identify ways in which your program has made an impact, you can develop an argument to advocate for resources to be allocated to your chapter or to your youth program. For example, if you have a peer support program and through evaluation efforts have determined that your program or service has improved the quality of life for recipients and reduced emergency room visits, you have a really strong argument to advocate for state resources to be allocated to youth and family programs providing peer support programs and services. This example can also go beyond program sustainability to really influencing the actual system by encouraging others to pilot similar programs or to perhaps change Medicaid rules to support making the service billable. Having data to articulate program successes can support the growth and expansion of your project or program. Going back to the example of peer support, say you are in the pilot phase of a peer support program. Evaluation data could support moving from a pilot program to a larger sustained one, or from a pilot in one county to be expanded to serve additional geographic areas. Evaluation can support you all in making future decisions about your programming based on the data you collect. In order for evaluation to be useful and meaningful, the results must be used to make decisions. Another way to make the data you collect work is for data-informed decision-making. So again, going back to all of the points that Bree just made. We utilize the concept of data-informed decision-making here at Youth M.O.V.E. National. So for example, when we actually first launched Direct Connect, we asked a series of polling questions to uncover what participants were hoping to get out of their participation, what types of professional development opportunities they wanted, and what activities would encourage retention during these webinars. Once those polling questions were in, we were able to create a really responsive strategy to roll out future Direct Connects by prioritizing future training topics to meet the needs of youth and young adults working in the field who had participated in those polls. We were also able to ensure that Direct Connect utilizes a more interactive media platform to engage you all throughout and in between webinars to retain participants and have you come back for future webinars. And closely reviewing and analyzing results will help you to build a responsive strategy for the young people that you're serving, much in the way that I just outlined that we do. The evaluation will point out both strengths and opportunities for growth and improvement. Identifying these areas of growth will be critical in the development of future activities or events, as this will ensure that you're providing really quality programming. And your evaluation results will also support quality improvement efforts. Put simply, continuous quality improvement, or CQI in short, is a quality management approach that really encourages you to ask, how are we doing, and can we do it better? An evaluation can reveal strengths of your program or organization, but it will also, as I mentioned, reveal these opportunities for growth and improvement. And if you can't see that both your successes and failures, you can't necessarily learn from them. So this is a nutshell kind of graphic that provides an overview of the evaluation cycle. You're going to start with an initial plan, and whether it be a training that you want to evaluate, a new service, a program, or an organization, you must really develop goals and objectives specific to that activity that you are hoping to achieve. And once you've accomplished that and figured that out, you're going to want to move into the implementation phase. From there, you begin the process of actually evaluating, so observing, conducting research, or collecting data that feeds back into that original plan. And the findings of your evaluation cycle back into your plan and informs how you're doing and whether you're performing well or doing poorly. And no evaluation is good unless the results are used to make a difference. So throughout the evaluation process, you're going to be building organizational capacity. You improve your ability to both plan and implement programs that will be successful. Evaluation will also support you all in identifying unmet community needs and assessing the impact of your social change efforts. When you're aware of what your local community needs are, you're going to be better able to build tailored program activities and utilize your resources much more wisely. Another benefit of evaluation is enhanced personal growth and development among staff and participants. Evaluation offers the opportunity to provide feedback about work that's already being done. It also provides evidence of your accomplishments, and I can't stress this point enough. Use your evaluation results to report back to boards, to community members, and funders about your program effectiveness. This is really an opportunity to highlight your successes and what you're doing really, really well. And as previously discussed, understanding how data can be used and what it can do for your program will help you to see the overall value of evaluation. Much of what I will discuss moving forward is going to be dovetailed from the concepts we just explored. So to reiterate that point, evaluation is really a mechanism for improving your program. And when you can identify the strengths and weaknesses of your activities, you're going to be able to create change and modify your approach to improve your program and your organization as a whole. So participatory research and approaches such as action research, or sometimes called participatory evaluations or empowerment evaluation, have been applied by a wide range of disciplines. The positive youth development movement influenced researchers and evaluators to include youth as partners in the design and implementation of research that affects their lives. Participatory research moves beyond fact-finding and uses knowledge gained to guide change in communities, organizations, programs, and within research participants themselves. Participatory evaluation is in many ways successful because it relies on local knowledge and emphasizes the involvement of non-academics who have expertise as individuals who are actually living the research issues. So really this goes back to valuing lived experience and understanding that those with lived experience are content experts in many of the things that we are hoping to change in this kind of systems change, system of care world. Participatory research methods involve historically marginalized and oppressed groups to study issues and conditions that are affecting their health and well-being, and it also encourages respect of multiple perspectives and methodologies. When attempting to identify who should be a part of an evaluation, a list of stakeholders can really be determined by asking a simple question, who cares about this? So why should we include youth voice in evaluation? Engaging youth in research and evaluation really generates useful knowledge for your program and community, but it also provides the opportunities to facilitate leadership development and empowerment. Foundational research in the field identifies three major factors that foster resiliency: caring relationships, high expectations, and opportunities for youth to contribute. This creates a really mutually beneficial experience for young people, organizations and systems, the broader community, and really the overall research process. Partnering with youth during evaluation promotes youth development and the improvement of the study of issues that are directly affecting young people's lives. Youth are directly affected by evaluation results, yet their knowledge and understanding of issues are often undervalued or dismissed. However, youth can really improve the evaluation process and results. For example, as important stakeholders in youth program activities, youth can really provide you all valuable insight in designing youth-friendly surveys or data collection practices and protocols. Youth are also able to bring really fresh insights and approaches and a level of clarity that adults often overlook. Are we asking, they can really help us, are we asking the right questions? Are we using language that's youth-friendly and easy to understand on surveys? We often get caught up in jargon that really isn't accessible to a broad range of people. Are we asking and gathering information in a way that feels safe and supportive for young people? Are we looking at our results from a youth lens? And youth can really help us to understand the data collected differently, bringing ideas that can help improve program efforts based on the information that we've received and collected. So there's certainly some things to consider during your data collection processes. When you're collecting data from youth participants, especially any data that might be perceived as sensitive, it's really important to provide an introductory statement outlining the intent behind the questions. For example, if your questionnaire asks a question about sexual orientation or gender identity, you will first want to explain the purpose of collecting that data. So you might want to say something like, the following questions really help us to better understand the diversity of youth that we're serving so that we can improve service quality. So just giving that brief little outline of why it's important can go a long way in building rapport and making youth feel safe when they're answering these types of questions. You also have to be aware not to make any assumptions. When we're neutral in our own position, this really sends a signal to youth that we aren't making judgments about who they are or who we think they are. This goes hand in hand with being mindful of nonverbal communication like body language. Youth are very, very perceptive and can feel a person's discomfort. So if you notice that you have a body reflex or reaction to something that a young person says, for example, if youth were to disclose information about drug and alcohol use, it's best to just acknowledge it. You might say, whoa, sorry I reacted that way. I wasn't really expecting you to say that, but I want you to know it's okay, and I'm comfortable discussing this information with you. So just really be upfront about what you discuss is confidential and within the bounds of any mandated reporting requirements that you might have. And mandated reporting is almost always exclusively related to information a youth discloses that indicates that they're being neglected or abused, so just be super upfront about that. So youth members of a team might have important insights into specific information needs of various stakeholder groups. So listen closely for ideas from young people regarding the language of evaluation questions, for example, as they can really help to create stronger and better tools. And youth can also be paid staff to support data collection efforts. So in a system of care community that I used to work in, we actually had young people who helped to collect the required national evaluation data. And they were able, we found that we had a better response rate when we had a peer collecting that information. But of course, there's some important considerations if you do that as well in terms of confidentiality and making sure that you are effectively preparing young people to be in that role. Youth can also be really instrumental in helping to interpret findings. They can help to translate findings in a way that's really going to connect with their peers and community members who haven't really been involved in the evaluation process. So really using young people to co-present findings can actually be a really great strategy for disseminating information and using evaluation results as an advocacy tool. You can consider developing a team of youth and adult partners who can present evaluation results to partner organizations, to the community, and educating policymakers and funders. Presentations by young people are often far more captivating to an audience of adults than just presentations by evaluators or adult leaders. But just make sure that young people have meaningful roles in preparing and presenting that information and aren't just tokens. So it's really critical to provide training to staff on the process of including youth in your evaluation and quality improvement activities. Caring and supportive adults are key to successfully involving youth in evaluation. Each youth is going to be at a different leadership level and engagement level depending on their personal motivation, the amount of time that they have to commit, and really their ability to take on tasks, so that capacity that capacity thing that Bree was talking about. So it's important to provide a range of roles depending on where youth are at. While some youth may be able to kind of jump right in, others are going to require more intensive support early on, and will then be able to transition to taking on greater leadership roles and independent activities. And though it's easy to rely upon kind of those star youth who show a really great level of leadership, it's really important to provide the opportunity to participate in evaluation activities to a really diverse group of youth. So really be mindful of engaging a group that really reflects the community that you're working within. So things to consider are, race and ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, and kind of education background. And of course, at Youth M.O.V.E. National, we always think that lived experience is extremely valuable. In order to sustain youth involvement, you're going to want to use research for change. Youth often disengage if they don't see results from their efforts. A report that sits on a shelf isn't going to necessarily be a super satisfying outcome for young people. So seeing actual changes, and that could be through a program change or a practice change or a policy change at an organization, for example, or the incorporation of youth feedback into a survey tool, that will go a long way in retaining youth and maintaining their motivation and enthusiasm to stay engaged. So we have another poll question here, and it would just be helpful for us to know, are you currently including youth in any of your data collection efforts? So, previously we asked if you're collecting data at all. Are you doing any kind of participatory evaluation, or do you have youth on sitting on an evaluation committee, or are you having youth help you to craft your survey tools, for example? So, if you could just take a couple minutes to answer that, please, that'd be great. Give it a few more seconds. Great. So it looks like a little over 60% of you are actually including youth in your data collection efforts right now, which is really great. That's far beyond what I would have anticipated, to be honest. So that's really good to see. And about 37% of you are not. So in order to prepare for actually conducting an evaluation at the program level, it's really important that you revisit your mission and goals if you want to be successful. That's going to really help you to identify whether the actions, activities, and outcomes of your program or organization are in line with the stated missions and goals. And that goes back to that original building blocks of clarity. It's also helpful to conduct a pre-evaluation checkup prior to conducting an evaluation. This step includes really taking an inventory of your program's existing assets and resources and taking note of what additional supports and resources you might need in order to successfully undertake an evaluation. This checkup will also help your program identify future evaluation goals. So that goes, again, back to that capacity. Do you have the resources? And I think it's important to note that when you start an evaluation, you don't always have to do everything at once. If you have very limited resources, it's okay to use what you're already collecting, whether that be demographics, or you start small by saying, okay, we're going to just start tracking the number of participants that come to our activities. Or maybe we're going to start implementing a training evaluation when we go out and do trainings in the community. It doesn't have to be a comprehensive overall program evaluation or an overall organizational evaluation. There are small steps that you can take with a limited amount of resources that will really go a long way for you all as youth programs. Another consideration before moving into the action phase of an evaluation is to really identify which stakeholders you might want to involve in the evaluation process. So really meaningfully involving community stakeholders will strengthen the evaluation process for you. Ideally, the stakeholders you engage should be involved in the evaluation process from the very beginning of anything that you do related to evaluation. And both identifying the purpose of the evaluation and the stakeholders you wish to engage are fundamental aspects to evaluation. To evaluation planning, to your focus, design, interpretation, and use of results. Engaging key stakeholders can have a lot of benefits for your overall evaluation. And in general, stakeholders include people who will use the evaluation results, individuals who will support or maintain the approaches you are testing, or anyone who are directly affected by your activities or the programming that you offer. And stakeholder engagement can help to determine and prioritize evaluation questions, facilitate the way you collect data, implement your evaluation activities, and ensure that your results are used in a really meaningful way. So before moving into the action-oriented steps needed to conduct an evaluation, it's important to set up the stage and do some preparation work to make sure your evaluation is a success. An important touchstone to reflect on and revisit before developing an evaluation protocol is again, your program's mission, vision, and goals. And identifying the purpose of your evaluation is equally important as conducting the evaluation itself. So really, evaluation will help you to address some really fundamental questions like, how do we know our program is successful? How is our program currently doing? Are we meeting the needs of our target audience or population? Is our project achieving the desired impacts and outcomes that we want? And kind of those basic, what's working well and what isn't working. Once you reflected and identified the questions you want to ask, you're going to be on track to developing an evaluation plan that can be implemented. So creating an evaluation plan. Before I get started, there's these four kind of boxes here on the what information should we track, what do we need to know about our activities, what method would work best to capture data, and what resources might we need. I'm going to ask the group, and you all can just put in the chat box if you have any thoughts on any of these. What information do you think as a youth program that you should be tracking? What would be useful for you all to have on hand if you were talking to a board of directors, or if you went to a system of care meeting because you wanted to advocate for some additional youth program funds? Is there anything that would be useful for you to have? How would you know that your activities are successful? What do you need to know about your activities? And to get at those things, how would you capture that data, and what resources might you need? And I'll give you a few minutes to chat if you have any thoughts. And Bree, if you have any thoughts, if you can jump in too. So Lauren said attendance rates as a measure of program growth and interest. Absolutely. I think that's a really important, it's so basic. It's pretty easy to capture, but it's surprising how many people don't actually capture attendance rates. So I think that's a really an important kind of data point to collect. Absolutely. Any other thoughts? It looked like someone else was typing for a second there, and now I don't see it anymore. Okay, well, if you have any thoughts, feel free to jump in and add to, add to the chat box at any time, and someone will be monitoring throughout. Madeline will be able to chit chat with you, and as well as Bree, so we'll keep an eye on it if you have any other thoughts that come to mind. So once you've reflected on some of those questions that I outlined just in the previous slide, you're going to want to consider things like indicators. So indicators are the specific things that are identified to be examined in order to answer your evaluation questions. So the indicators that you select should really answer your evaluation questions and help you determine whether or not your program goals and objectives have been achieved. So your indicator should be SMART. I'm sure you've heard that before, which is to say specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. So those indicators can be quantitative or numeric. So for example, as Lauren pointed out, the number of youth who participate in your program or an event, or they might be more qualitative in nature, which is non-numeric, with responses to a question on, you know, perceptions of community safety, for example. When developing your evaluation design and data collection process, there are several considerations you're going to need to think about. It's especially important to be culturally sensitive and consider how different groups prefer to share information. The R stands for relevant. So it should be relevant to your original question. No problem. So, you know, your different groups prefer to share information differently. So similarly, when you're collecting data with diverse participants, it's also important to be thoughtful about language barriers and how to address those. And when I say language barriers, that doesn't just necessarily mean, you know, translating into a different language. You also want to be really thoughtful about making the language, as I said, accessible to a broad range of cognitive and developmental abilities, you know. So I think the standard that I most often hear is trying to keep things at about a 6th grade reading level, so that most people are going to be able to understand it. And you're also going to want to be mindful of the number of participants involved. So, you know, if you're doing an evaluation, it's a lot harder to collect, you know, so example for a focus group. It's a lot harder to do a focus group with 40 people than it is with, you know, 6 to 10 or doing several smaller groups, as well as your program timeline and the types of program. And then finally, you have to be thoughtful about your ethics. And when you evaluate, you must consider which method of evaluation is going to be best suited to get you the information you need while addressing the unique needs of the population that you're going to be working with. In some cases, you might use several different types of evaluation methods. So questionnaires, for example, are really simple and effective tools for collecting information from a large number of people. Questionnaires, also surveys, are relatively inexpensive to administer as well, so that's a real pro of doing them. And they're able to evaluate both process and outcomes depending on the types of questions that you ask. And questionnaires can either be have what's called forced choice questions, where, you know, sort of like what we've been doing with our polling questions, you're forced to make a choice between a multiple, you know, choice option, or that more open-ended qualitative where people can freely respond. And those forced choice questions have a limited number of responses from which a respondent can choose. And one advantage of those forced choice questions is that they're much easier to analyze. So if you're thinking about, again, capacity at your organization, and you're using something like Google Forms or SurveyMonkey, that analysis can be done quickly for you. Or if you have one staff person who's designated, like it's much faster to do that kind of quantitative forced choice analysis. And open-ended questions solicit that more qualitative feedback, and where respondents are free to answer as they choose. And they can provide much more in-depth and rich information, but they certainly do take longer to analyze. So focus groups or are group interviews, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this and have done them, you know, through a facilitated discussion on a clearly defined topic. And I'm sure many of you, as I mentioned, are familiar with this evaluation method and have likely used it in your community many times. But make sure that before you conduct a focus group, that you really clarify expectations. Again, select a diverse group of participants. You want it to reflect your entire community so that you are fully understanding an issue. And support participants in attending with things such as reminders, you know, sending out text messages or emails or Facebook posts. And then if possible, if you have the capacity, really some incentives really, some stipends or some transportation money, or food. We always know that young people like food. Key informant interviews are another useful way to access kind of that first-hand knowledge of a program effort. So you might conduct that with a grant project director or community leaders or youth participants or even funders, for example. Another method might be observation, which really attempts to document behavior through watching and listening. And you can use observation to gather information about a program's process or the results it produces. So however, you want to be mindful that if you do conduct observation, that the observer may impact the behavior of those who are being observed. So be sure you're adequately training observers to take note of the setting and the participants, activities and interactions, and then frequency and duration. Another really great method that we often use when you have limited resources are pre and post tests. Those are an easy way to assess changes, whether knowledge gain or a change in attitude, for example. So you might create a standardized set of questions and administer them at an agreed upon entry point and exit point. So for example, if you're doing a community training, you might do the pre-test before the training begins, and then do the post-test after the training has been completed. And then you can compare the responses from the pre and post-test to measure any changes that you see. So we've said this a few times, but evaluation does require resources, including staff time, data collection tools, and sometimes a data management system. But there are several free tools available that can support you all as youth programs to create questionnaires and surveys that will create these real-time reports for you and do a lot of the analysis for you if you don't necessarily have that skill set. So some of the kind of top software that offer free versions or at least free trials are SurveyMonkey, Google Forms, there's Poll Everywhere, Typeform, and Survey Gizmo, and those are just a few. There's many, many more. And for the versions that you purchase, nonprofits often are eligible to receive discounts, so just keep that in mind so that evaluation doesn't have to kind of deplete your resources. And finally, you're going to want to use your data. As I said, data isn't really that meaningful if nothing is done with it. So, you're going to want to create an action plan of next steps based on your evaluation results. And you can make tangible and realistic commitments to change your program practices or actions that are really going to help you to achieve meeting your goals and objectives. Evaluation can really support internal quality improvement processes and can provide, as I mentioned earlier, justification for sustainability, or can really be used for your own advocacy efforts as a youth program. And now I'm going to actually hand it back over to Bree, who's going to provide you all with an example of how Youth M.O.V.E. National has used an evaluation process to improve our own processes and programming.
Great, thanks, Kristin. So as you can tell from today's presentation, a lot goes into understanding the what, the how, and that is needed for crafting an evaluation plan. A lot of effort goes into it, and sometimes it takes a lot of effort to be prepared and ready to do that. So Youth M.O.V.E. National was very intentional that as we are hoping to promote more data-informed youth-run organizations, that we also needed to do some reflection of our own practices and help create standardized kind of approaches that work well for us, but also are able to be replicated at the local level for local programs as well. So Youth M.O.V.E. National started off with conducting an organizational assessment to see where we were at as an organization as it pertained to those 3 C's we mentioned earlier: clarity, capacity, and culture, as we looked at our internal data collection efforts. And we utilized a tool that was developed by Derek Mills called Understanding Data Use for Continuous Quality Improvement. It was a short survey. It gave us a score. It asked a series of questions. We had everyone within our team at the organization as well as our board of directors to complete the assessment. And it categorized and gave us scores on where we were doing really, really well and where we might want to spend a little bit more time to improve our own understanding. And for us as an organization, we needed to understand and build some capacity on how are we going to do this as a team. And so with that, it really allowed us to look at what data do we have currently, and is it data that other people have that we might use? So for example, we partner with our national system of care evaluation team. So maybe there's data that they're collecting that we could also tap into as needed. We're a membership-based organization with chapters all over the country. So what data do we need to know about those chapters to better support them in their local program development? And so we looked at data that we get through our social media and our Twitter and our Facebook, and data that we collect when we go on site to communities and we do pre and post tests when we're offering training. We looked at all of the types of data that we have and then thought to ourselves, are we asking the right questions to the right people at the right time? And if not, those are gaps in our data and gaps in our story that we might need to do a better job at collecting. And so we came together as a team thinking about key aspects of our programming, and then we worked together to think about how we would be able to develop a more informative data collection effort that allows us to gather the data that we absolutely need, not just data that we're going to ask but then never use it. So it makes it meaningful for us and supports the local communities. And so with that, we realized that across the youth engagement field, there's a lot of terms that we use, and what engagement looks like and what meaningful engagement looks different from community to community. So we started thinking about maybe we need to standardize definitions of what the work looks like in communities, so that when we look at all of our youth engagement in our chapters, we have some standard language to talk about. So when we say we want to monitor and track peer support services, we needed to be really specific about what we mean by peer support services. Are those Medicaid billable peer support services or the informal pro-social kind of peer services offered? So we started to create really standard definitions. Just like when we talk about, we want to know what meaningful partnership means. Does that mean that you participate in activities with another organization? Does that mean you partner and co-create? Does that mean that they're paying you to do work? And we wanted to know those types of things. So we were able to create these standardized definitions, provide those to all of our local chapters, so that now we are evaluating and gathering information about each of our local chapters in a way that is uniformed across the movement. And it's very helpful. So once we started doing that, it was important for us to inform young people and our chapter leads, why are we asking this information? Kristin mentioned that kind of pre-statement before you ask this tough question, making sure they understand why and how we're going to use the data. So we were able to provide that guidance to our chapters. So we explained to them, we created a cheat sheet of all of the definitions, we created a series of questions that we wanted our young people to respond to, and then we sent out in narrative form what has changed about our annual chapter reporting process. Why are we asking these questions, and how it's going to help build the movement and sustain the movement both nationally and locally. And that's why it's important to capture and gather this information at the local level and share it with us nationally. We provided that in a narrative form. We also provided opportunities for coaching calls and webinars so that our youth leaders are understanding why this information and this process is so important to keep the work going. So that's an example of how we at Youth M.O.V.E. National kind of created an annual reporting process that can also replicate as a portion of programs and activity kind of evaluation plans. So what type of information at the local level might you want to continue capturing? We also then looked internally at our organization and said, hey, now that we got information from our chapters, what else do we need to know? And so we looked at aspects of we want to increase communication. And so how are we going to do that, and what method can we gather more information about increasing communication with our members, and how we can increase communication between chapters and chapters. And so we were able to create survey tools that went out that provided us information to help us improve what methods of communication and strategies work best for our young adult leaders across the country. We also were able to then consider gaps in regards to when is the right time to ask these questions of our chapter leaders and our young people, and making a kind of calendar plan of like, these questions go out this time of the year, these questions go out this time. So then that way we're not inundated, young people, with all kinds of questions to ask. So it's very important for us to also consider the over surveying of youth and families. So other aspects, we were able to kind of utilize that process of improving our communication strategies through data collection. We also track impact and reach numbers from every activity we go to. We do kind of pre and post surveys and satisfaction surveys. We also engage our young adult members to help us in the creation of surveys. So we're working currently with a group of young adult leaders who are helping us develop a membership survey. So not only asking what our chapter is doing, but really what is the impact at the local level of a member that joins in on these activities, and creating some standard tools that would help measure that individual impact of being a member and participating in youth engagement activities. So all of these kind of evaluation plans that we have at a national level took us time, and we had to go back to that assessment. We had to create clarity on what it is that we offer, what it is that we're doing, how are we going to learn more about that, and then what are the ongoing efforts around improvement? How are we utilizing that data? So Youth M.O.V.E. National has a lot of new approaches that we've been implementing that are able to be done at minimal to no resources, allowing those strategies to very much be replicable at a local program without having a big evaluation contract, utilizing software and things that are pretty user-friendly for young people, but yet it also helps bring a wealth of knowledge. The reports that we're able to gather around impact and reach and the type of activities chapters are participating in and their needs as chapters, that's all information that if you're a local youth program, you would be able to utilize that data to go back to funders and say, we need funding on this area because we need to improve, or we'd like to continue this program going because we had such a huge impact and the outcomes were really great of this. And it's all information that you'd be able to utilize to help with your local sustainability plans. So this isn't always something that we need to have a big federal grant to do and to research. These are basic components to any strong organization that need to be considered. And so if you are looking at sustaining your youth efforts, it is really important for you to think, without your big federal grant, without the adult supporters doing data collection, do you have enough data to tell the story about your youth program so that you can continue soliciting grants and foundations and kind of trying to continue to keep your program up and open, and that young people can really benefit from it. And without that data, sometimes that can be really, really hard. So that's a little bit about what Youth M.O.V.E. National has been doing internally, and if you have more questions about any one of those kind of efforts, Kristin and I could be available to share with you kind of how we're going about doing that and kind of our steps. And we have some resources and tools that we would also be able to share with you so that you can try to replicate locally in your community. And so up next, this is only part one of a two-part series. So we are hoping to come back in, I believe, February, and we will be doing a part two, which is how you use your data for improvement and sustainability. So we touched a little bit about it today, but kind of think about going back and reflecting on what you learned today and thinking about kind of your clarity and your purpose and what your strategies might be. And then we'll come back in a couple months and we'll talk about, now that you have a strategy to collect the data, how might you use the data for improvement and sustainability. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Maddie for questions.
Great, thank you so much. So awesome. So we've had a lot of great conversation today. Thank you for using the chat box. If you have any questions about some of the stuff we just covered, now is the time that you can go ahead and type this into the chat box, and we will be happy to answer any question that says, has Youth M.O.V.E. published the tool it uses to measure individual impact on participants?
So I can answer. Oh, perfect.
Go ahead.
Kristin, do you want to jump in on that? Go ahead.
Sure. So the membership survey that Bree referenced is actually being finalized through our Youth Best Practice Committee. As Bree mentioned, we are actually partnering with young people to create this tool. And that should be finalized in probably January or so. And we're hoping to pilot that with our chapters either in late spring or early summer. So we haven't finalized that to be shared publicly, but if you're also thinking of the tool that Bree mentioned that we did to assess our own clarity, capacity, and culture, we are happy to share that with you all if that's what you are referencing.
And then the other thing, Youth M.O.V.E. National, as you can tell, we're kind of doing some of our evaluation work kind of in phases. We did publish a new tool that is available, which is called the Youth Voice Agency Assessment, which is a youth-developed tool that measures meaningful youth engagement at the local program level. So that tool is available, and that's a tested and validated research tool. The information is on our website, or you could reach out to Kristin and myself. And that is a tool that, as we talk about engaging youth in system of care efforts or systems change efforts, this tool really looks at, are we engaging them in a meaningful, appropriate way at all levels of the work? And it's a self-assessment tool that you would collectively do, adult supporters as well as youth. That tool has recently been published, and as Kristin mentioned, we're trying to finalize those next tools. So again, it is a priority of ours to keep developing tools and then making them accessible to the local field, the local level, and to the field for use.
And I noticed Ashley asked a question in the chat, which I responded to in chat, but I want to just respond for those of you who may not actually be on looking at the screen. Ashley asked a question about the age group that will be completing the tool that we are creating for members. That tool is for any participant of our local chapters, so there's going to be a broad age range, probably from around 12 to 26, since that's what primarily our chapters serve, although I would guess that the majority of participants are within the 16 to 21 range, or that's the trend that I have seen anyway. But all of the questions in the member survey that myself and the Best Practice Committee members have been creating are really being modified and pulled from existing positive youth development tools that are validated. So we feel really confident that even though they aren't necessarily verbatim, that there is some validity behind them, and that the kind of theme, so to speak, will hold together. So, we're asking some questions about, competence and feeling connected to community and things like that. But there will be an age range that will be completing that survey.
All right, thanks. Any other questions from the group? Feel free to put them in the chat box. So we have a question that says, will you share these slides with us?
The answer is yes. The Institute will certainly follow up and send slides out. And also, if you're actually connected to Adobe Connect right now, you can actually download the slides directly from Adobe Connect under the Files option. You should see, Youth Leaders, and if you just click on that, you should be able to download. And I know that there was a lot of information and that some of the stuff is sort of heavy, so feel free to reach out to Bree or myself if you have additional questions, or if you need to think about things and then come back to it. I know sometimes sometimes I need to process before I can ask a question right away. So this is our contact information, and you can also, of course, reach out to Madeline and Marika, who can connect you to Bree and myself as well if you're more comfortable reaching out to them.
Absolutely. And I will go ahead and put my email address in the chat box in case anyone feels the need to reach out. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us today and for sharing with us about your experience and the way that you're using data. Please don't forget to take our survey, give us some feedback about what your experience was like, and we look forward to hearing from you next time.